Ported Books presents Luke Jensen, Bounty Hunter, by William W. Johnstone, with J.A. Johnstone. Narrated by Jack Garrett.
Prologue. A rifle bullet smacked off the top of the log and sprayed splinters toward Luke Smith's face. He dropped his head quickly so the brim of his battered black hat protected his eyes. A splinter stung his cheek close to his neatly trimmed black mustache. Luke looked into the sightless, staring eyes of the dead man who lay next to him. "Those amigos of yours are getting closer with their shots, Jose. Too bad for you that you're not alive to watch them kill me. Reckon you probably would have enjoyed that." Jose Cardona didn't say anything. A bullet hole from one of Luke's Remingtons lay in the middle of his forehead, surrounded by powder burns. Most of the back of his head was gone, where the slug had exploded out. More shots rang out from the cabin about 100 yards away, next to the little creek at the bottom of the slope. The sturdy log structure had been built for defense, with thick walls and numerous loopholes where rifle barrels could be stuck out and fired. Luke had no idea who had built the cabin. Probably some old fur trapper or prospector. Those mountains in New Mexico territory had seen their fair share of both. Currently, it was being used as a hideout for the Solomon Burke gang. Luke had been on the trail of Burke and his bunch for several weeks. There was a $1,500 bounty on Burke's head, and lesser amounts posted on the half-dozen owl hoots who rode with him. If Luke was able to bring in all of them, it would be a mighty nice payoff for him. Unfortunately, it didn't look like things were going to work out that way. Luke had tracked the gang to the cabin, and had been crouched in the timber up on the hill overlooking the creek, trying to figure out his next move, when someone tackled him from behind, knocking him out into the open. They rolled down the hill together, locked in a desperate struggle, even as the man screeched a warning to the others at the top of his lungs. The big log, which had also rolled about 20 feet down the hill when it toppled sometime in the past, brought the two men to an abrupt halt as they slammed into it. Luke barely had time to recognize the bandito as Cardona from drawings he had seen on wanted posters, when he realized the man was about to bring a knife almost as big as a machete down on his head and split his skull wide open. Without having to think about what he was doing, Luke palmed out one of his Remingtons, eared back the hammer as he jammed the muzzle against Cardona's forehead, and pulled the trigger. The point-blank shot blew Cardona away from him, and the dead outlaw flopped onto the ground behind the log. Luke had rolled over and started to get up when a bullet had whipped past his ear. Instinct made him drop belly down behind the log. A second later, more rifles opened up from the cabin, and a volley of high-powered slugs smashed into the fallen tree. If it hadn't been there to give him cover, Luke would have been shot to pieces. As it was, he was pinned down on the slope. The trees above him were too far away. If he stood up and made a dash for them, Burke and the others in the cabin would riddle him with rifle fire. Trying to crawl up there would make him an even easier target. The grass was too short to conceal him. He was stuck with a dead man for company, and it was only a matter of time until some of those varmints slipped out of the cabin and circled around to catch him in a crossfire. Luke's craggy face was grim, in spite of the ghost of a smile lurking around his mouth. In plenty of tight spots during the years he'd spent as a bounty hunter, he had always pulled through somehow, but he had known his luck was bound to run out someday. After all, he had already cheated certain death once. A man didn't get too many breaks like that. From time to time, he rose up long enough to throw a couple shots at the cabin, but not really expecting to do any damage. Too long range for a handgun. His nature wouldn't let him die without a fight, though. He could put up a better one if his Winchester wasn't still in the saddle boot strapped to his horse, a good 100 feet upslope. Might as well have been 100 miles. "Blasted Jose, I must be getting old to let a clumsy galoot like you sneak up on me," Luke said, keeping his eyes on the cabin. Cardona had been a big, burly man, built along the lines of a black bear. Like all the other men in Solomon Burke's gang, he'd had a reputation for ruthlessness and cruelty. He had killed 7 men that Luke knew of during various bank and train robberies, and was probably responsible for more deaths in addition to those. But he wouldn't be killing anybody else. Luke took some small comfort from that. He tracked down outlaws, mostly for the bounties posted on them, and he wasn't going to lie about it to himself or anybody else. It pleased him to know, because of him, men such as Cardona were no longer around to spread suffering and death across the frontier. More bullets pounded into the log. One tore all the way through it and struck a rock lying on the slope, causing the bullet to whine off in a ricochet and bringing a thoughtful frown to Luke's face. He realized the log had been lying there long enough to be half rotten in places. He holstered the Remington he was still holding and drew a heavy-bladed knife from its sheath on his left hip. Attacking the log with the blade, he hacked and dug at the soft wood. It didn't take him long to break through and see what he'd been hoping to see. The log was partially hollow. Luke began enlarging the opening he had made, and soon realized the hollow part ran all the way to one end of the log. He could see sunlight shining through it. It took 15 minutes of hard work to carve out a big enough hole for him to fit his head and shoulders through. By the time he was finished, sweat was dripping down his face. He sheathed his knife and looked over at Cardona. "Adios, Jose. If I see you again, I reckon it'll probably be in hell." Luke wormed his way through the opening into the hollow log. Down below in the cabin, the outlaws hadn't been able to see what he was doing. He could only hope none of them had snuck around to where they could observe him. If they had, he was as good as dead. He began
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.